Hello. Good morning, rather. I'm just delighted to be here with Michael and Joan. Michael is a legendary curator, as you guys know, and I just love the way he described being in the artist studios, smoking cigarette, smelling turpentine,
Yes.
and talking about painting.
Yes.
That's how you describe your experience being with Susan Rothenberg.
Yes.
Early on, and Joan, of course, is one of the most important artists, especially for me in the Brooklyn Rail, because she embodies what I'm trying to do at the Rail, all the cross-pollinated fields of interest and discipline. So you can't really reduce Joan in one or two things. So it's delightful to be here with you both.
Thank you. Good to be here with
Yeah.
both of
Yeah,
you.
it's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, Joan, I remember once we had dinner and you described that you study with my Shapiro Columbia in art history while taking classes with Peter Agostini.
That's right.
Yeah, and it was so, I mean, I don't remember reading elsewhere where you say that, but the point was that I know at some point you gave up sculpture and then embark on your own, I mean, immersive practice. We can't even name them. But how did the experience being a sculptor, or what were you making at the time that had any leading relationship to your early performances?
I don't think it really has a direct relationship. I think the relationship is in studying art history and making sculpture and thinking about space. In the when I shifted to performance and then later video, it was the issues of space that I brought with me, not object making.
Yeah.
I made figurative sculpture, which everything I destroyed, like some other artists we can name,
Yeah.
destroyed their early work. So it's really the idea of space and figure in space, I suppose figurative,
Yeah.
because I studied the figure. And I continued to make drawings,
Yeah.
and I incorporated that practice into my practice of performance and video.
And did you use dance to help in that transition?
I
Did it
didn't-
play a role?
Major role, because in the 60s, the dancers, mostly women, but some men, like Simone Forti, Yvonne Rainer, Deborah Hay, Lucinda Childs, and so on, were all teaching.
Yeah.
They all had little workshops, and to make the transition, I spent maybe 2 years, and also Trisha Brown, taking workshops, and to make that transition, because I had never performed or been in theater or anything. So that was and it was the influence of seeing that group of artists in the 60s, the dancers working with Rauschenberg and Oldenburg.
Yeah.
I realized that, that would be, I'm very attracted to that form.
That's fascinating because it parallels to some degree what Susan did.
Yeah.
Susan got a bachelor's degree in sculpture and was essentially thrown out of Cornell because, I don't know why exactly, but she left Cornell, decided, well, if I can't make sculpture, I'll make painting.
Yeah.
But when she moved to New York, she went to those workshops. She went to Deborah Hayes.
Well, maybe that's where I met her. I was trying to think where we met her,
Yeah.
where we met each other.
Yeah.
And then she became part of some of your
Yes.
performances. So-
Yeah. Well, we became friends.
Yeah.
We really were friends, and we remained friends. I didn't see her very much after she moved to New Mexico, but yeah. So we were friends, and she was wonderful to work with. She would just plunge into anything I wanted her to do.
Yeah.
Did she participate in all
Yes.
your early
Yes.
No,
performances?
she performed in 3 of my performances. The outdoor work, a piece called Underneath at Alan Surratt's loft, and in the mirror pieces.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Amazing. Michael, I always felt like what the decade of the 60s, which was predominated by pop art and the emergence of course, minimalism, conceptual art, and then process art, may have a little bit of, relational to how, what your performance were at the time. In a way, the 70s did.
Oh, the 70s is a very...
Susan Rothenberg.
Definitely. I mean, the context of the 70s,
Yeah.
you can't read it. It's hard to read it now from where we stand, but if you were there in the 70s, I mean, it's such an underrated decade of experimentation, coming out of pop and minimalism. And, they were clean, they were bright, and the 70s brought in a kind of a dark, raw, black and white feel. I mean, if you look at Susan's early horse paintings here, there's three colors. There's black, white, and you call it terracotta. Susan always referred to it as sienna. It's like an earth color.
Yeah.
And those of us who were there, these paintings feel like they came out of the 70s. And like one of the early paintings in this show, which was in a small show that I did very early on. It's called Non Mobier, and it's a small horse, just a profile. And I remember seeing it very early on, and Susan said, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "It looks like Richard Serra as a baby." And I meant it, and she laughed, and she got it though, because the horse had this sort of childlike muscularity to it.
Well, I mean, yeah, I see that. I think that, I just want to say one little thing.
Yeah.
When she worked with me, she loved my dog drawings, because I used a dog, and that was one thing. And then she worked with Nancy Graves.
Right.
And, well, she knew Richard, of course. Richard had made a show in Rome of animals.
Right.
That's right, stuffed animals.
That's right.
So, I mean,
And
she
lion
made those in the mid-70s, and then I didn't think I didn't see her paintings when she was working with me at all, in the very early 70s.
Right.
So I think that I think what was unusual and striking was the use of the horse as a figure.
Yes.
In the mid-70s.
Yeah.
Yeah. And these are amazing to see them again. They're beautiful.
Yeah, they're very strong, very declarative. So they had that declarative possibility of minimalism, but there was a mystical quality to them, which I think she had to get some of that from you. I mean, she had it herself, if you knew her as long as I knew her. Yeah. But there was a mystical, almost surreal quality about these. It's almost like when you look at one of these simple horses, it's got a little Magritte in it.
Right.
Is this a horse?
Well, I think I like what she said, and you brought it up.
Yeah.
What she said about the line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in almost all the horse paintings, there's a line down the middle, which flattens the canvas. Flattens, and then it also divides it. So that the horse appears, she can place the horse in that flat field.
Yes.
Right.
That the term picture plane must have come up 1,000 times a day in the early 70s.
Really?
Coming out of minimalism and the abstraction of the 70s with Bryce Marden and Robert Ryman, and there was no image.
Right.
So all you could talk about was the picture plane.
Yeah.
But Susan took it very, very seriously, and the line is a way of keeping that picture plane flat.
Yes.
And as you pointed out earlier, Phong, how the shadows happen where it mixes the picture plane up, where you think, is there depth there? Is that a shadow? Or is that black coming towards you?
Yeah.
And a question I have for you, Joan, is that these shadows, I've always thought, have this sort of mystical quality about them. And they're about doubling.
That's right.
Right? Didn't you do a piece called Double Lunar Dogs?
I did. I did.
And when was that? It was pretty early on, wasn't it?
Now I can't remember.
I think it was like late 70s, maybe?
77, maybe, Joe.
Yeah, it was late 70s.
Yeah.
Well, Susan and I were friends, and really good friends.
Right.
And then, she went off in another direction, so that we talked a lot. We spent a lot of time together. I remember one thing. I had Oriental rugs that my grandmother gave me. They were Russian rugs.
Yeah.
Beautiful patterns. And I remember her sitting on one of them and saying, "Oh, My family has rugs like this. I think it's an early learning process to look at, if you have rugs, to look at the patterns. Anyway, it's just a little anecdote.
Right.
But you know, early on, Joan, you were describing it was space that interested you. So this is, we're talking about late 60 or 68, which is your first performance. That was the height of the Vietnam War. And that was the Tet Offensive, 68. And I know that your work, in addition to every other activities going on in the art community, or the film, dance, and experimental video, and whatever else going on, you have been also preoccupied with your political activism. And thinking about space, you know, Michael's interested in regarding to that line that divides the picture plane, so to speak. I also see it as a existential condition. When I look at it, you know, you see the delicate pencil line that drawn very freely in the middle. They're not all perpendicularly straight. Sometimes they have a slanted diagonal tilt to it, depend which painting you're looking at. But I believe that there's certain kind of illusion, whether conscious or not conscious, Joan, to both Barnett Newman and to Giacometti.
Oh, I'm sure you're right. Actually, I mean, I see, we've all been influenced by many people. But anyway, yes, Barney Newman put a line down the center of his canvas. And I think we can talk about Giacometti later, if we talk about her paintings after this, because of the brushstroke. You know, the way she built up form with the brushstroke.
Right.
Which is very different from the way, a little different from the way these are painted.
Yes.
It's brushstrokes and the outlines, and then the beautiful texture of the overall color. She never painted like this again, I don't think, exactly. Did she, Michael?
No.
No.
These were very rigorous paintings. Susan was a sponge with a very critical eye. You know, so she knew what to steal. You know, and she got from abstraction that line. The line divides the painting, but also in some of them it negates the horse.
That's right.
And so all of a sudden you're going, it is a Magrittean thing. Is this a horse or is this a painting? Which she also got from Jasper Johns. Is this a flag? Is this a painting? But to go, to stay in the 70s a bit, you know, the 70s, in my memory, was very much about common materials. Using common materials in a very raw way to create an art experience. And these horses that Susan painted, these are not horses of the rich and famous. No. These are just brutes. These are just brutes. And Susan told me early on, she said, you know, I didn't really ride horses. I didn't really know what horses looked like. So she went down to the stables, the police stables in Manhattan.
Oh, really?
To look at horses. So those are blue-collar horses, right? They're not race horses. And I think that's what her colleagues recognized, that she wasn't trying to make an equestrian painting here. This was like just a Carl Andre piece of wood.
I think that maybe one reason she chose the horse, who else was painting horses?
No.
Not what we know.
I mean,
nobody that I can remember.
Major in art history, horses.
Oh, what's the British guy?
I mean, throughout the history
19th century.
All through. I mean, people riding horses. And, but Susan was the first one. I'm not sure anybody else did after her, focused on horses either.
Right.
So it's unusual.
She did also tell me, and she showed me some of the books, she did look at the cave paintings in France, in Spain, not in person, but she had books.
Oh, well, that would be important, I think.
And that's, I think that's where some of the terracotta color comes from, is from that's the cave wall. Right?
And I'm amazed at how anatomically correct those cave paintings, some of them are. They're amazing in that sense. I wanted to ask you, do you think that she was influenced by Philip Guston?
Yes.
I see that in her painting. I mean,
yes.
When he came out in 1970, that was a huge break.
It was.
For somebody like that to make amazing.
Yes. And Guston painted both abstractly and figuratively. And Susan appreciated that ability to make something that looks abstract and yet then up pops a figure. She would go in and out of her admiration for Guston because she heard it a lot. But every painter, every figurative painter of that generation, you know, was credited with understanding how important Guston's move was. You know, he was making hundreds of thousands of dollars selling these beautiful abstract pictures, and then boom, he makes these things that Hilton Kramer called stumblebum paintings.
Unbelievable.
A Mandarin pretending to be a stumblebum. Yeah, that was the review that he written for New York Times.
Right.
Negatively respond to Guston's show in the winter of 1970.
Yes.
The first time he showed those
That just
things.
shows you what the atmosphere was like then.
Yes.
But you know, Joan, I mean, I don't mean to pound on the political, you know, anxiety, feeling of anxiety at that period, as Guston was.
Right, yes.
So the sense of existential, you know, in the air, the feeling of it is very prevalent, whether it's visible or less visible. All I'm saying is that for Guston, that was leading to Nixon years, of course, to Watergate. He was very motivated. He was completely absorbed by the whole political climax at the time, but
broadly speaking, I see where you're coming from. Broadly speaking, you know, you couldn't paint abstract paintings anymore, is the point here, right?
Yes.
And Guston said it, you know, he would read about the Vietnam War and he said, I couldn't go back into the studio and adjust a blue to a green. I just couldn't do it. And so in the case of Susan, I'm not sure we can say there, you know, that there's a political image in it, but there's a political attitude.
Well, I think it was the whole atmosphere of the time, actually. I mean, we couldn't, there was the Art Workers Coalition, you know, there was many people actively engaged.
That's right.
And, or it could be an unseen part of your work or preoccupied, but it was a major, I mean, nobody was escaping that situation.
In terms of politics, and I'll ask both of you this, and particularly you, Joan, Susan never wanted to talk to me about feminism. I always felt obligated to ask if, you know, if feminism played a role in her work, and she always said, you know, I never know what to do with those questions, and so I don't want to talk about it. But one thing I did notice, going to studios a lot in the early, late 70s, was how many women artists' studios I visited. Not because I was a feminist. I didn't know how to be a feminist. I didn't have a vocabulary for it. I didn't know how to deal with it. But all of a sudden, and in retrospect, I realized all of these women came out of university art departments, just like the men, moving into Soho and edging their way into the picture.
I mean, when I taught in the 70s and 80s, I was always the only woman teaching, always, in all these places. That's just another remark. But on the other hand, if you think about the women artists that were her contemporaries, who she knew, Mary Halleman, no, I can't.
Jennifer Bartlett,
Elizabeth Murray.
Elizabeth Murray. I'm thinking more of the figure. I mean, Jennifer Bartlett was more of a flatness, but those who were dealing with the canvas and the, you know, Mary Halleman with the, in a more abstract way, she wasn't figurative, but so they were her friends. I mean, she was in the milieu. Mary Halleman lived down. I think Susan lived there for a while.
She did.
Yeah. So she
did.
So there was a general. So women were very strong, as you know, at that time. I mean, they should have been stronger, and they were in a...
Or perceived more,
but they were very important anyway.
No, and she was, I mean, Susan did say something to me that's always stuck with me. I would hate to be able to walk into a gallery and know if a man or a woman painted that painting.
Well, I understand where she's coming from.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of people did not want to be in a woman's show, you know. They wanted to be an artist.
Right.
You know, and recognized as an artist, not a female artist. And Susan was one of those, I'm sure.
Yeah.
One of those people.
Right.
Because I never remember talking about feminism. And that was, you know, when we were working together, it was like really important. It still is, but it was a particularly important issue. So I don't remember talking to Susan about it.
Yeah.
But she became a strong, happened to be female artist, you know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But to get back on this painting again, Michael, we were talking earlier, how it's difficult to recognize or to feel whether the painted form, especially in regard to the edges, the positive and negative, because so much of it is mediated or negotiated from the side, what the edge is painted in or out. It's hard to follow the line.
Yes.
You know, so whether the vertical straight line in the middle divided the two into supposed to be left and right, sometimes you have hard time feeling the form within the context of being framed. Like this one, for example, you know, you have two strong black verticals framing the paint in the middle. Whereas others, there's other way of framing it. And it's not exactly to the edge or not, but it is in the edge of the horse.
What covers the whole thing, though,
Yeah.
is this very particular brushstroke that Susan had, which is not quite a crosshatch brushstroke.
Right.
But it's it's constant moving. And she was, you know even better than I, she was very energetic. She was small, wiry, very energetic. Her brushstroke has that kind of energy to it. On both sides of that line are these brushstrokes. And the way she painted, though, as I was saying earlier, I never watched her paint in person, but she had all these turpentine cans set up around the studio, and she would put paintbrushes in the turpentine cans to clean the brushes. And rather than put more paint on a new brush, she would just take out the dirty turpentine and start marking it. And that's why her paintings have this kind of earthy, dirty quality.
Yes.
She used to say she likes dirty colors.
Right.
Even her whites are kind of...
She liked to dirty them up.
She did. She did.
Patina.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but still, these are made between 74 to 77. So it's 3 years, Joan. So that's leading to the tail end of the Vietnam War, ended in 75, and the aftermath, few years aftermath, you know.
Yes.
So there must be some, you know, inner anxiety, you know. I mean, I don't know whether that's a way to...
I think we were anxiety-stricken by our government. I mean, there was anxiety.
Right.
Not everybody responded to it directly.
Right.
I mean, but everybody was aware of it. And we had a terrible government.
Yes.
I mean, do you
we
remember?
did.
Yeah.
And I used to think about, I made a piece about it, sort of, about how we were all in our studios, you know, doing our little things. And then there was Nixon in the White House.
Right.
And it's a terrible thing going on.
Right.
So I think it was a time when, people were in their studios and aware of what was going on, but not actively in the street, many people. But certainly you couldn't avoid it. I don't know if that explains it, but a little bit.
But it does. It helps explain the atmosphere around all the art that was made in the 70s, you know. And these horse paintings have that quality, but they're also something, and I keep wanting to press you on it, Joan, mysticism about them, you know. It's not just surrealism. And remember, you know, you mentioned that she worked with Nancy Graves. There was what was called neo-primitivism in the 70s. Remember that? So Nancy Graves, Jackie Windsor, right?
Yeah.
You had, and then if you put the horses in a room with that, that would be a very interesting show, actually.
But what about new image painting show that Richard Marshall did at the Whitney in '78, which Susan work were included?
Yes.
You know, along with Zoe Zucker, Nicholas Africano,
Right.
definitely Neil Jenny and
Yes.
Jennifer Bartlett and a few others. What about that context, Michael?
Well, that show was organized by one of my closest friends. I went to high school with him, Richard Marshall, who was a curator at the Whitney. And it was a brilliant idea at a very particular moment to say, look, all of these people are making figures in a different way, but we haven't had this in a long, long time. And, but somehow the brilliance of the idea got dissipated by the experience of the show. Did you see the show?
I did, of course I did. I mean, it was an important show.
It was a very important
I agree
show.
that it all disappeared.
It did.
Why was that,
Very
Joan?
quickly.
Why do you think that was?
What do you think, Michael?
Well, you know, I think it was a thesis that was so simple that when you finally tried to portray it in a show, it went, well, yeah, one guy makes them big, one woman makes them little, one person does this, and you kind of walked away not understanding the particularities of any individual figuration. It just was a kind of a marker of between, well, there was no figure, and now there's a figure.
There was a constant fight. I remember with Barbara Rose, there was a constant struggle going on.
That's right.
With Barbara Rose saying, painting is not dead. And then, who was it? Joseph Cazouz, painting is dead.
Right.
You know, so that was another little thing going on at the same time.
That's
and I think
true.
it's interesting that there was a need to show new image painting, because images have always been with us. And then all of a sudden we have to have a show called New. So it's a kind of mixed situation.
Yes.
A little. And I think like somebody like Robert Moskowitz,
Who was in the show also.
work I really love. You know, I'm not sure how he felt about that. I don't know how.
He had been doing it a long time.
That's what I mean.
He was the oldest of the group.
But some of these people had been. So the new image idea.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Well, I mean, they appreciate it, but they repudiate the term.
Maybe for the public,
You know, because when you make a painting, it's a new image emerge. But I don't know. I mean, without that group show, it will be hard to conceive how neo-expressionism would come about.
That's true. I mean, if you think linear, you don't usually think in a linear manner, but that you are. That's
I try
true.
not to.
That's true. That's interesting. I think where I would go with this is, so if you're someone like Susan, you know, she was already pretty famous. She was in the New Image show. The New Image show was a famous show. Where do you go from there?
I think that's true of several other people. In that show.
I agree. And they didn't know where to go. And Susan also, at that time, was that show like 79, right?
78.
78. Susan was also going through a lot of stuff in her personal life. There was the political aspects, but I don't think the marriage with George Trachis was going very well. And the horse had kind of, she'd moved through the horse. She didn't want to be a quote-unquote horse painter. And so those paintings that came in 78, 79 were really rough. I mean, big heads spewing black bile out, big, you know, arms being torn off.
You know, yes, it's true, but that's what I find interesting about Susan, is that she went to that other extreme. From the interior. I think that those paintings come from her interior.
That's a good way
I mean,
to
it's
put
a
it.
very graphic illustration of that, but for me, that's what makes her. I mean, these are brilliant paintings. I love these. I think what makes her a long-term interesting artist is all the work, maybe not that particular period. After that, where we start talking about Giacometti, and the way she built up surfaces in a very different way. I love some of those paintings. Those are, but they're not. She said, there's a piece about her in Art 21, if you want to listen to it. I mean, she said that she was never able to find a series again like this. She said, a lot of artists like to paint in series. And she did the horses, but she could never find another series. Or she never found one.
Yeah.
Not couldn't. But
Well, they became, with those paintings, I'm talking about 78, 79, 80, they became autobiographical. So once you enter that realm, then the series becomes obsolete.
That's right.
Doesn't it?
Yes.
And, you know, I think that the autobiography, I mean, when she moved to New Mexico, married Bruce Nauman and moved to New Mexico, 1989, something like that, 90. That was the first time she'd really been exposed to real horses. And so she painted a couple of horses, just almost, well, why not, you know? But she painted a lot of dogs. She painted the goat. She painted, there was like a circus-like action taking place all around this ranch.
Right.
And when I would go visit, I was just stunned. It's like chaotic here. I mean, you got to feed the horses, the goat's jumping, there are 5 dogs. I think what became clear, looking back on it, is how much Susan just loves animals.
That's it.
Yeah.
She loved dogs.
Yes.
I visited them one, I don't know what year it was, but we shared things like we liked to go on walks. She loved to go, as you know, went on long walks
Yes.
with her dogs. And she
Yes.
adopted dogs. She always had several dogs, right?
That's right.
And yeah, I think it's ironic and wonderful that she ended up with horses, you know, that real horses in her life. That's great.
It's hard. I've challenged people in the past because I've done a number of catalogs of Susan using photographs of her in the book. It's hard to find a photograph with Susan without a dog in it. It's really, really hard. You know, so there is that kind of autobiographical element that I take it back through these early horse paintings, that these are to some degree autobiographical. They aren't just blocks. You know, they aren't.
How do you think how would you explain that?
Well, I would explain it by saying that some of them, and they're not all here, but some of them are falling down. Some of them look like there is a couple where it looks like tears are coming. There are paint drips that are coming down from their eyes. Now, I'm probably exaggerating the fact a bit, but some of them are giddy, like the painting in front of us. I mean, they have this element, and again, I tie it to you and your work, this idea of doubling. So if we're doubling, what are we doubling? Just the thing? Or is that these shadows that are behind, are they shadow images of somebody?
I mean, this one behind us, there's a double head.
Yes.
But there's no double legs. The legs are just, so it's ambiguous, and also
Very.
the idea of doubling and
And, you know, she was married to an artist, and some of them, the doubling has to do, they're like couples.
right.
I mean, it could be. And well, she did tell me that there are some of them that are what she called pre-divorce paintings.
Which divorce? You mean with George?
With George, yes, with George. And because I don't really know how long that process took. But the ones that I was talking about in the 79, where, you know, the bile coming out, she called those divorce paintings.
Oh, really?
Yes, she referred to those as divorce paintings.
But the idea of doubling might refer to the way the canvas is divided in half to begin with, you know, Michael?
True.
So whether it's formally or other psychological condition, it's hard to tell, but I see it as you mentioned Giacometti. You know, Joan, Giacometti worked from life.
Work what?
Worked from life, even though he, prior to maybe 39, I think, he had been already celebrated surrealist sculpture.
He's one of my favorite artists, Giacometti.
He's mine too.
When I started out, he was my main inspiration.
Interesting.
Well, these thin figures that held the space around them. You know, a very thin figure in the middle of the room. Hold it. And then the brush strokes.
But that's it, John, right?
The brush strokes.
Yeah, the brush stroke. But the brush stroke came as a result, arrived at the result of doubting what he saw. So he had to cancel it out or paint it over multitude of times until it's reduced to almost nothing. I mean, I think that, to me, it's similar to the way that Newman with the line, even though it doesn't have the same painterly quality, but the emphatic doubting where things can be held in space, the image itself. So for Giacometti, it's painting from life, where this is painting from the imagination.
Right.
But to arrive at the similar
Her
gravity.
process was similar
Right.
to what you describe. If, you know, because I would go to her studio a lot, so while I never saw her actually painting, I would see a painting in process. And you know, it was this paradoxical procedure in which she was adding paint and reducing image. So she would go there and she'd go, no.
Yeah.
And right before a show, she would always go back in the studio and she never added anything that I know of. She always eliminated, always took things out. That's too much.
Right.
That's too much. And that's what you describe with Giacometti is the same way, and
Yeah.
holding the space.
Holding the space, which Michael Branson, you know, I think he, at the time, the critic New York Times, actually Michael did his doctoral dissertation on Giacometti. And many years he was on the foundation of Giacometti.
I didn't know that.
It's very interesting. So I remember when he wrote Susan's show, maybe when Gagosian had his space in Chelsea, that he described Susan's brilliant ability, or one of the great attributes, was that she can listen to the voices inside of her to tell her what to do. Just the patient to listen.
I think of all the I would add Pat Steer to the group of women painters. I think of all those other painters who are women,
Yeah.
that Susan was the weirdest, in a good way.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I like weirdness, so I'm just saying that's a compliment. And the most radical, I'd say, image maker, in a way. But it was very different than the others. They were all more abstract. Hers was, she was the only one putting that psychological content, right? Into the work.
Yes.
And I think that's very important.
And gutsy.
And gutsy.
Very gutsy. Not that the other women weren't gutsy, but you know, there was her 112 Green Street show was an amazing show. 3 paintings, big paintings in a basement space, and you know, this was 75. I'm pretty sure that show was in 75, and you walked in. And Holly Solomon insisted I see the show. Holly Solomon was on the board of 112 Green Street, and she dragged me over there, and said, "You got to see this." And it was, I mean, it was like being in a cave. It wasn't well lit.
That's great.
It was these rough, big horses. When there was no thought of new image painting, and when she painted these, and they were semi-site specific. Because the space was bigger than the studio she had. So she had to paint some on the floor of her studio, because she didn't have a wall big enough, roll them and take them to 112 Green Street and put them up. So she was thinking about the space, holding the space, as you call it.
Yeah. Holding the space is an interesting concept, isn't it, Joan?
Well, that's what we try to do.
Yeah, no,
It's your
but
job.
I mean, we take it for granted. I mean, it's had to do with how things all being together. It's like your early performances. It's the viewer, you yourself, the artist, and the space, all being together at one unified whole, so to speak. But I think looking at these paintings now, we talk about doubling, we talk about positive, negative negation, adding, subtracting. We talk about Guston with the political content and the reductive palette.
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting in Guston too, because by that period of 1970, that infamous show, prior to that, he's already reduced the palette to black and white, maybe red, maybe arriving to the figure, the figurative paintings of onward, I mean, that was a whole decade. He died in 1980. Soon after his retrospective of San Francisco Museum, Modern Museum. So he really never lived long enough to enjoy the
That's true.
You know, the so-called celebrated young artists that would admire.
That's true.
That admire him
That
so much.
is- yeah,
But
that's
the
true.
reductive palette
Yeah.
is a very interesting way to look at how this painting was made. Did she ever talk to you about that, Michael?
Well, you know,
It can't be just minimalist.
It
you know.
isn't just minimalism.
Yeah.
I mean, you can even. I mentioned that the sienna is like the cave wall, and you can look at it that way, or you can look at it as. To me, the 70s were a black and white era almost.
Yeah.
Everybody wore a lot of black. There was. It seemed to me. Of course, I was coming from California, so it probably seemed.
Oh, it must have looked very black.
It looked really bleak to me. You
Yeah.
know, walking around Soho in 1973, I'm like, whoa, you know.
Yeah.
But even her whites are very reductive and a bit dirty. And when I did the retrospective at the Albright Knox Art Gallery in, I forget what year it was, Joan Simon came to the opening and later wrote a review of the show for, I think, Art in America. And in it, that night coming from the opening at the museum, it was snowing.
Oh.
And it was a kind of a dirty snow, as you get in Buffalo.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
thought, that is brilliant.
That's great.
That is brilliant.
It's funny too because technology, the Portapacks that we were all using are just black and white, not color.
That's right.
I didn't do a
That's-
color video until 1976,
There you go.
and then I shifted to color. Anyway, that's another
No,
story.
but I think that is part of that black and white era, yes.
Well, it has to do with minimalism too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Joan remained a very good friend of Susan's.
Oh, yes.
All her life.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
It's so interesting too, you know, Joan, in regard to your work. I mean, people were experimenting at the time, Michael.
Oh,
Late
yes.
60 into early to mid 70. When you look at so many artists, including, for example, Richard Serra,
Yes.
began making films, film of on action, hand catching lead and hand touching surface and whatnot. What was so interesting were the fact that they were black and white.
Well, that was when it was available.
That was available.
I mean, partly I'd
Right.
say that is because
Right.
in film, color is more complicated, and it didn't exist in video.
Yeah.
But those are films that you're talking about. They're not videos.
Right.
That's right.
They were film.
Yeah.
Right, they were film, Joan. But my point was, when you mentioned black and white, you know, the beginning of those films, you know, short film, structuralist film, so to speak, lean into what Richard was doing before the sculpture. You mentioned the stuffed animal, the live
That was
animal show.
really way before, yeah.
I know,
Because
way
he
before.
started making those plate
Late
pieces.
60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Late
But the show that you were referring to, the stuffed and live animal in La Scala, must have been 67, 68 maybe,
Yeah.
before we come back.
Before he came to New York, yeah.
Right. But
Right
my
before.
point is that, you know, I mean, Richard then went on to make
Yes.
those plates and then the curve works and whatnot. But Joan remained continuing doing the immersive performance that include everything out under the sun, you know, text, poetry, music, sound, everything. I mean, it's quite remarkable. But going back to black and white and singularity, minimalism and all that, looking at these paintings now, how do you see it? How does it resonate to today's context, Michael? In terms of painting culture.
It's hard, and I can imagine younger artists looking at these and not understanding them in some
Really?
ways. They're so raw and direct. I think they would understand the directness of them, the rawness of them, but you know, and maybe it's just because I'm becoming a cranky old man, you know, a lot of the art I see today, there isn't much raw mysticism in it.
Well, I mean, I'm very behind the times, but there's also a lot more detail and complication.
Yes,
complicated images. I mean,
Yes.
the way I see these paintings is I think they're incredibly, on the other hand, elegant.
That's true.
Compared to everything else Susan ever did, these are elegant.
Yes, they are.
And they're beautifully anatomically drawn. The horse is anatomically correct. She did, so she could make these images, you know, it wasn't that she couldn't,
Yeah.
she could. And then the other thing that I see is, I mean, you mentioned the cave paintings, but also their walls, you know,
Yes.
it's like they're painted on a wall.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is a wall,
Yes.
a wall, you know?
Yeah.
Holding
So-
the wall.
Holding the
Holding
wall.
the wall.
Yes.
And the form, it's not a different, well, some of them are
Right.
black and some of them are not. But anyway, so I see them as very elegant.
I think these paintings right now exist in this twilight zone between true art history. I mean, they're about to recede. I mean, they're very, very important pictures, I think. And but for a certain generation right now, maybe it's too distant for them to grapple with.
Right.
But not distant enough that they can just go to Jansen and go, oh yeah, it's that, you know.
I don't know, I'd really be curious to talk to some young artists and ask them, you know, what do you think of these? I think they haven't been seen in a while.
I think, well, there's that. I know in the process of this show, I contacted a few.
Yeah.
And all of them knew of Susan Rothenberg as a name, but didn't really seem to have a connection to the work.
You know, that is true of so many, you know, there's so many artists. I think that a lot of people know names and not the work, because you can't take it all in.
That's true.
I think that is part of it.
I think that is it.
Well, I mean, I think that so many young artists, particularly painters, Michael, they seem to have this collective desire to re-examine history through the lens of art historical references. So there is an anxiety there, what we're going through, particularly with the Trump administration and what we are feeling today.
Yeah.
I think that the anxiety, the anguish, a sense of existential, you know, aura about this work, it had a certain kind of relevance to today's context. It's just that it might require prolonged viewing.
Good point. No one has the time.
Well,
Right?
I hope painting or any great art is made
No one has the time.
not to spoon feed
Yes.
for small sound bites.
Yes.
You know, even in context of Warhol, I remember running into John Updike when he wrote a review of Warhol retrospective MoMA, must have been in '93 or something. I think I met him through George Brazil at some function, and I told him that I enjoyed reading his review, but I don't understand why it's reduced to Colin Warhol, who made, you know, fast art for busy people.
For what?
For busy people.
Busy people.
Really?
Fast
Yeah.
art for busy people.
That was the title of the, just like the title of the review. And I say, you know, in his film is the opposite.
Yes.
You should also spend time looking at the film. So
Watch
I think
Empire. Yeah.
that's right. So these are slow.
That's true.
Slow art.
This is slow art.
This is slow art.
I think all great art actually is slow art, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, if you take
Well, it takes a long time to do anything.
Yes.
So
Yes.
in that way, it's slow, yeah. I mean, to come to a conclusion takes a...
Yes.
Well, I didn't have breakfast, so I'm getting hungry. I
Oh, you
need
are?
to break.
Okay. It's the power of doubting.
It's the power.
Yeah, the power of doubting, the power of being hungry. So thank you so much, and hope you all enjoy it.